And good evening and welcome to Kaufman Corner, a Kansas City Royals podcast. You can, of course, if you're catching us via the podcast later on down the road, you can catch us when we stream the podcast live. We do it on YouTube, Twitch, LinkedIn, Twitter. If you're on Twitch, YouTube, or Facebook, you can be a part of the comments. We got a lot of folks already lining up in the comment section. We always appreciate that. You can be a part of it here. Make sure you hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. Tell all your friends. Come on, people. It's Royals baseball. What more could you want to talk about as we broadcast live right now? Wrap up a Thanksgiving weekend with me, as always, the good doctor, Dr. Rany Jazayerli, co-founder of Baseball Prospectus. My name is Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City, 810WHB.com. You can hear my radio show 2 to 6, Monday through Friday, Central Time. And we're going to get into the things we're thankful for. I'm actually very excited about this. This is a Rany Jazayerli idea. I don't think I've gone the direction he's going. So I think you're going to get two very different things we're thankful for when it comes to Royals baseball. We're going to do that in a minute. I don't know if we're going to get to Carlos Beltran. I really don't think we're going to have time. I put it on the list. We're going to get to Carlos Beltran. Is he or is he not a Hall of Famer, and all the things that go into it, and all the things that go into the Royals organization, and how many people they have or how few people they have had come through their organization that are actually Hall of Famers, whether it's finding them themselves or not. Well, that's probably going to be a bigger discussion later on down the road. So I maybe pump faked you a little bit on the teaser that I sent out. So I apologize if you're like, yes, let's talk Beltran. It's probably going to end up being later. We'll see where it goes. And we are going to talk about the lack and start with, before we get to the things we're thankful for, Rany, with the no news. The Royals still have no pitching coach. You want to go ahead and try to explain to me how this is good? You want to try to take a shot at that? Is it just no news, or is it bad news? Where do you sit on this?
Sometimes no news is good news. Sometimes no news is bad news. I suspect this time no news is no news. Okay. I think it's just no news. And certainly this week, I mean, it was Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving, Saran. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
And same to you, Rany. Thank you very much. You're such a better human being than me for remembering the season. You're the man.
I could look at a calendar, Saran. It's not. I don't think I deserve too many hosannas there. But I think this past week, it's quite possible. It would not at all surprise me that in the next 48 hours we have an announcement. Like I don't want to put too much into the Royals radio silence right now. It was right around the time you and I were wondering where the heck is our manager when someone like Dusty Wathan was re-upping with the Phillies, and we were sitting around waiting for the Royals to make an announcement. And it turns out they were probably just dotting their I's and crossing their T's, and then they wheeled out Matt Quatraro for us. So I am very hopeful this week we will have a pitching coach. We need a pitching coach. We need a lot for this organization. They need to get a move on. Other teams are already signing actual pitchers. The White Sox reportedly having signed Mike Clevenger, who was actually earlier this season, back in August, was high on my list of guys the Royals should pursue. He then cratered the second half of the season. So I'm not saying
there were still a lot of people. You weren't alone in that. We had a lot of folks that were on him, and even on him late as someone that they would like to have seen. So yes, your point is very valid. That other teams are often moving.
Yeah, it's time. It's time, and I don't blame them for being deliberate that they want to get this. It's an important decision. I certainly want them to make this decision with all due deliberateness, and not because somebody is the buddy of their manager, which seems to be how the last pitching coach was decided upon. So, but better get it right than get it first. But at this point, it's already too late to get it first, so they better get it right.
Yeah, and so but officially put you down for no news is just no news.
Right now, no news is no news. In 72 hours, if we don't have a hint, with the winter meetings coming up here in the next 2 weeks, that would be concerning. I don't expect that to be the case.
I can't get my arms around what they are possibly needing to do to make this decision. Can you?
No, I can't. I don't know. I would like to think it has nothing to do with money. We certainly know that the financial skill here is pennies compared to essentially any player or personnel decision that the Royals could be making. So if it's just a matter of they are interviewing not just 4 or 5, but 10 or 12 people, that would be understandable. The other thing I would hope for, that I'm hoping we'll find out, is that the pitching coach that they do end up hiring is not just that's not the only news that we're going to be hearing. That it will be announced in conjunction with, here is an assistant pitching coach, here is the head of pitching development in the minor leagues, here's a whole host of new employees that we are bringing in. If we get an announcement that it's 5 or 6 different people all being hired at the same time, the pitching coach will be the big news. That will be the one everyone focuses on. But I think for you and I, the other names on that list will be nearly as important. And the fact that they are hiring them en masse will be a really good sign. I think that would be the best possible outcome for why it's taking so long, is that they're trying to get not just one person. They want to make an announcement of multiple people at the same time.
Yeah, and that's what I'm hoping. I think that'll be the most comforting thing. If they trickle out just one more name, then I'm going to officially start putting out warning flags, right? Like that this is, if it's like, okay, here's the pitching coach, or here's some other position we continue to evaluate for the pitching coach. I mean, listen, I want to offer this as a possibility. I say this all the time about general managers, or about NFL general managers. If you go back and look, even successful ones, generally speaking, their worst draft is their first one. And it's because they're having to do a lot of things that they normally don't do. They're having to go hire scouts and put together a front office. And so they're just endless grinding of watching tape and the whole process and talking to coaches and hiring the background check people to run around. Doesn't get done. And I think they're cramming it when they go into it. Is it possible that's what we're watching, as JJ Picollo has a vision for how he wants his team to be different? And there's so many things coming at him that, there's a little bit of paralysis by analysis. They want to overturn every stone. They want to look at every candidate. They don't want to possibly miss anything. And as it stands here, sometimes a bad decision is better than no decision. I mean, I will say this, a bad plan is better than no plan, because no plan, you're just sitting around. And so I get that you want to have the perfect plan. You want to get the perfect guy. But at some point, there's work to be done, and you got to get to it. And I think that's the fear, is like, when are we at that point? Like, I always like to put the date out there and say, if we reach this date and there's nothing, we've got a problem. Where's that date? Because Thanksgiving's in the rearview mirror now.
I think it's by the end of this week, by Friday. That's why I'm saying right now I'm not worried. This week though, there needs to be a hire. I'd like to think what you're saying, that JJ Picollo is sort of just not prepared for the sheer amount of stuff that he has to do as the guy running this front office. Let me
be clear. He could be not prepared. I'm just that there is so much that has to be done. It's not that anyone taking this job is not prepared for it or isn't making the right decisions. I just want to be clear. I'm saying there's a lot to do. There's more than just the normal timeline of things. So I don't want to say he's not prepared. I'm not making – I'm offering that as a distinct possibility. Listen, that's true of any first-time general manager. Of course it is.
You never know. Right.
Yes, but I am not saying that that's what we're witnessing here. I am quite – but I am baffled by how long this is taking.
Yeah. I mean, I would be concerned if that were the case, simply because JJ Picollo should be as prepared, or should be as aware of what this job entails as anybody who does not have GM experience could possibly be. I mean, he was Dayton Moore's right-hand man for basically the last 15 years. Like, he knows, he may not have been making those decisions, but he knows exactly what goes into this job. And while maybe he wasn't expecting to be flying or walking without a tightrope here, suddenly in September. I mean, he was promoted to general manager last year, and he interviewed for general manager positions, being the number one guy in other organizations. I want to say the Phillies interviewed him probably a good 5 years ago now. So this cannot be a surprise to him, the details of the job. Even if he hasn't done the job, he knows exactly what the job entails. He knows he has seen, hiring and firing of key personnel in an organization for, most of his career. So this should not come as a surprise. I don't think it is. I'm still optimistic that this delay, like the slight delay in hiring a manager compared to the timetable you and I wanted, that it is procedural and not a sign of some sort of organizational paralysis. That would certainly not be a good sign if a week from now they still don't know who they're hiring. And especially because this is the point in the offseason where coaches are finding jobs with other organizations. It's one thing to go out and hire a guy, whose contract has come to an end with another organization, but presumably whoever you hire is somebody in demand because their reputation as an arm whisperer is well established. And if they haven't heard from you by now, they're going to take a job somewhere else if they've got that opportunity. It's going to be a lot harder to then lure a guy who just agreed to a contract 1 week earlier and say, oh, now, by the way, we do actually want to give you our pitching coach job. Would you like to take it? And, renege on the agreement you just made with another organization a few days ago. So they need to get a move on.
I think where we've now hit a point where there needs to be an announcement soon is when, the Texas Rangers all in one swoop hire Dayton Moore, which we've been hearing was coming for several weeks, and name Mike Maddox their pitching coach, right? Like these things are getting done, and I'm dumbfounded by what process is going on that you're still gathering information. We're both going to feel a lot better if they announce here are 12 new guys, right? Here's this. They announced an entire coaching staff, minor league coaching staff, all these different things all come down at once. Then we're all going to feel a lot better. But short of that, it's starting to get a little bit. It's time to go. It's time to go. We're about to be in December for God's sake. But before long, you're going to be in, winter meetings and, there's stuff that has to get put together for that. So yes, it is now time to get something done. We'll see. We'll have to find out what ends up being the case here as we move forward. Now, do you want to introduce our thankful side of things?
Yeah, well, we were both questioning what we were going to talk about today after a week of exactly zero news from the Kansas City Royals. Understandably, it's the holidays,
right?
And tis the season of Thanksgiving, giving thanks, and I thought, why not spend some time giving thanks? Despite many reasons to the contrary, you and I have been Royals fans for many years, and while they have certainly been a source of much heartbreak and heartburn for decades, there are certainly things that they have given us that have made us stay fans of the organization.
So in the spirit of the holidays.
In the spirit of the holidays, and as an excuse for me to talk about the 2014-2015 Royals ad nauseum. It's been 7 years now, but I'm still not tired of talking about so many of the ridiculous things that happened for a 15-month out-of-body experience as a not just a Royals fan, just as a baseball fan. And so I thought this is a great opportunity for me to talk about that on the show, and let's do it.
All right, you lead us off. I'll let you go first. We'll go back and forth.
Okay. I don't know how many we'll go until we run out of steam here, but okay. I have many things to be thankful for. So the first thing I'm thankful for as a Royals fan, this is my experience. Anybody above the age of 50 would disagree, but as much as the Royals have, been a source of irritation and ennui and boredom for all those 100 lost seasons, and there were so many years where we were out of it in June, and there's just nothing to play for. The Royals have never really given me the kind of heartbreak, the kind of if just one thing were different, we would have won. This sort of heartbreak that the Kansas City Chiefs have given me many times over the years. Very different experience rooting for these two organizations for the last 35 years. One team much better than the other, but also found a way to make my life a living hell at times. The Royals, it was never in that sense. And for older Royals fans, the 1976, obviously Chris Chambliss, the home run to end the ALCS, excuse me. The Royals being tied one run away from going to their first World Series. Chris Chambliss broke a ton of hearts in Kansas City. I don't know if you were old enough to remember that series. Yeah. Okay, so I'm fortunate that I don't have that memory. And to me, frankly, the worst memory would have to be the following year when you had a 2-run lead in the 9th inning of the ALCS in Game 5 in a best of 5 and blowing a 2-run lead at home to the hated Yankees. And then even 1980, the World Series. I mean, I think it's an underrated part of the Royals fan experience is that the Royals outplayed the Phillies for most of that for most of that World Series, and they just blew a lot of late leads, and there was a lot of heartbreak there. But ever since then, the Royals, in part because they've been pretty much terrible for most of that stretch, but from 1981 on, the Royals have never really suffered a loss that made you say, you just was like a dagger to your heart. And now, if you're listening to this, you're like, but wait, yes, Game 7 of the 2014 World Series. I have not forgotten Game 7 of the 2014 World Series. I was there. And that was an incredibly painful moment. But the Royals never led in that game. Let us not forget, the Royals were down by a run. Actually, they may have led in like the 3rd inning, very briefly. But the Giants took the lead in the top of the 4th, if I recall. They were down a run, and they just could not come back against Madison Bumgarner.
Right.
And it's very, very different than what happened to the Red Sox in 1986, or the Giants in 2002, or the Rangers. Speaking of the Texas Rangers in 2011, which is a loss they may never get over. And that's and for a franchise that is still yet to win a World Series, to be one strike away twice, that's something we've never experienced. But I walked out of that stadium in 2014. And like everyone else, I was like, well, what if Alex Gordon had gone, right?
Right.
And I will say, from the moment it happened, from my perch, I was seated just past the third base, down the third base line. So I had an excellent view of Gordon sort of tearing into third. I thought he should hold immediately. Even in the moment with emotion, I'm like, you would have been out by 30 feet. And I will hold to that. It's funny watching baseball. Every time there is a hit to the outfield and there's a guy coming around third base and it's cut off by the shortstop in short left field, that to this day still comes to my mind is and you watch it, and almost every time it's like, oh yeah, this is why Gordon should have helped. But every now and then there'll be a play where it's like, maybe the throw was offline or whatever.
So is it all playoff memories are what you're thankful for?
Well, let me explain. I'm saying I don't have a painful what if memory as a Royals fan, with the exception of this game.
Yeah,
this is the closest to it. But here's my point. This is a very long story, I know, but with the podcast we can go forever. Who cares?
I do.
There's no commercial tonight. That's your problem. So my point is, but after that season, you would watch replays, and you watch replays of that play. Gordon doesn't come busting his ass out of the batter's box when he hits the ball. And in his defense, if he had and the center fielder had played the ball correctly, he might have made too far a turnaround first base and might have been picked off going back in. So it's not like he should have. But let's say he knew, he had premonition that he hits that ball and it's going to be misplayed not by one but two different outfielders, and just takes off like a maniac for home, 360 feet all the way around the bases. If he does that, and if he doesn't stumble, very briefly he stumbles coming around second base. If you watch the replay, there's a very brief stumble. So maybe if he runs absolutely perfectly from the moment he hits the ball, he's close enough to the plate to give him a shot. All right. So you could say to yourself, Alex Gordon, who in many ways the perfect Royal, the quintessential Royal, the man who's going to probably have, well, we'll get to why, but good to have, a statue of him at Kauffman Stadium or perhaps at the new stadium in a few years. Guy played his entire career with the organization. Number 2 overall pick, number 1 overall prospect. The Alex Gordon story. But in this one moment, maybe he could have done something differently. Maybe he had something, he needed absolution. And walking out of that stadium, I thought to myself, I don't know if I'll ever get a chance to see this again. Right?
So you're thankful for him.
I'm
not
thankful
busting
for
it
the
out.
fact that if you thought he needed absolution, what are the odds that so walking out of stadium, the Royals have just lost the World Series. It may be 10 years, it may be a lifetime before they go back. Not only do they come back, win the World Series the following year, which is making that moment as unpainful, like alleviating as much pain as possible, because they literally came back the very next year and won the World Series. You could also argue they probably don't win that World Series if they hadn't lost in 2014. The edge that team had, that everyone talked about from spring training on, the 2015 Royals, I don't know if it's there if they win in 2014. They were on a mission. And when you consider how close they came to losing to the Astros in the ALDS, do they come back from 4 runs down in the 8th inning if they're not on a mission? I don't know. So in my mind, at least, I accepted the fact that the 2014 failure was almost necessary for the 2015 success. But that's not enough. What if I had told you, as you walked, I don't know if you were you at Game 7?
Yeah, I was there.
Okay. What if I had told you, what if or right after you'd seen the video and said, geez, damn it, Alex, why couldn't you have run it out and scored there? What if I told you that in the very next World Series game ever played, that Alex Gordon would come up again down by 1 run in the 9th inning, and this time he would not be held at third base because he was trotting home with a home run to dead center field that not only tied a game that the Royals would end up winning, but fundamentally changed the entire World Series. Because first off, they win that game. If he doesn't hit the home run, they lose that game. They lose that game because Eric Hosmer makes an error, mind you, in the 8th inning to give the Mets the lead. But because he hits that home run off of Juris Familia, and then the Royals win Game 2 on a Johnny Cueto complete game, Terry Collins brings in Familia in Game 3 after the Mets had I believe a 5 or 6 run lead, to pitch the 9th inning with a 6-run lead, because he wants to wash the bad taste out of Familia's mouth having blown a game. They're going to win that game no matter what. But he brings a Familia. He's already pitched an inning. Remember, Game 3 is the only game in the playoffs where you have 2 games 2 consecutive days after that. You got a game the next day and the day after. And sure enough, in Game 4, the Mets have a 2-run lead in the 8th inning. Because Familia had pitched an inning the night before, he doesn't bring in Familia to start the 8th inning. He brings in Tyler Clippard. The Royals get a rally going against Tyler Clippard. By the time Familia comes in, it's too late. The Royals win that game. And now, Game 5, instead of being up 3-1, the Mets are down 3-1. And if they had been up 3-1, and they're 3 outs away from winning a world championship in the 9th inning, he's going to his closer to close out the World Series. He's not playing patty cake with Matt Harvey, because you have a world championship right there for the taking. But because they're down 3-1, he let Matt Harvey go out to the mound of the 9th. You know what happened. I honestly think Alex Gordon's home run changes a 4-1 series win for the Royals, or what would have been a 4-1 series loss into a 4-1 series win. So the most painful moment as a Royals fan for me in the last 38 years, 40 years, was made whole in the very next World Series game ever played by the same player. I am so grateful for that.
So you're thankful for, in a sentence?
I am thankful that the most painful moment that I suffered as a Royals fan was made whole in the most ridiculously perfect way possible.
Okay.
In the shortest time possible.
I like some of the ones that have been put up here from some of the folks. Cotman, I'm thankful for Ken Harvey taking one of the noggin. That was good for comedic purposes along the way. I like this one. I'm thankful for Mike Sweeney whooping Jeff Weaver's butt. Yes, I am too. I'm thankful for Lima time. That's a great one as well. I can tell you that as much fun as you had watching him in that '03 year, covering him was even better. He'd walk up to you, throw his arm around you. What you need, my man? And I'm terrible at a Spanish accent. I gave it a shot, but he was absolutely fantastic. I'm thankful for the Chuck Knobloch yips. Jason says, I think there's so many great ones that have been thrown up here in the chat room. So I hope everyone's had a chance. If you ever get a chance to see the stream or catch it on YouTube, you can watch it on YouTube. You can see some of the ones that are getting put up here in the chat room. It's pretty good. Mine is going to be. I'll be quicker. It seems like if we're gonna.
I would hope so.
If we're gonna go play by play of 8 different games, inning by inning on each one, then trust me, I'll be the quicker one of the bunch. I am thankful for right field GA. Right field GA in the old Kauffman Stadium is where in 1989, old school right field GA, it was $5 to go to a game. $5. No preferred seating. There was, if the old folks here will remember, and I think Matt, and I know Matt, who's one of our regulars and always commenting and everything. In fact, he by the way, he said this. Already needs a big flying dog, and we'll have the never-ending story part 3. Yes, well
you
done.
know what you're getting yourself into when you tune into this show. Like if you're expecting something different from me, then that's on you, my friend.
We'll edit and post. I think I can bring that down to about 2.5 minutes. It went 14. But the point ultimately, once we got there, was a good one. But right field GA, and Matt said 1989 was the year he fell in love with the Royals. That was a team that won 92, 93 games and was an exciting, fun team. Still had George Brett, had Bo Jackson. That year, too, was like my big year of really becoming an adult on Royals baseball. And it was the summer before I would go away to college and not be able to go to Royals games because I went to school I'm wearing the shirt at Syracuse in upstate New York. But I saw 42 games that year before I went to college at the very end of August. And we were out there every night, and it was $5. And they don't do it anymore. I hope they find a way to come up with a section, whatever it is, where there is no pre-sale. And the only way you can get the tickets is to get your fat ass out there, in my case, get in line, buy a ticket, run down, grab the best seat you can get. Because I was one of the best summers I had was going to the ballpark with a buddy of mine, and we'd go out there almost every night. It seemed like every night. We'd head out there, we'd get in line. We were never at the front. There was a group of just nut jobs that were always there right at the front. But we'd be in about the 4th or 5th row, going for fly balls, looking in the bullpen. It was awesome. And that's
what year was this?
1989.
1980.
Yeah.
Great year.
Great year for the Royals. And the Royals were really good. They had a fun team. Flash Gordon was making things happen as a rookie. It was just a really fun team. I will forever be thankful, not just for that season, not for the time I had with my friends, all that stuff, but it was all made possible because there were $5 seats. So a guy working, a part-time job to save money to have to go to school was able to go to a ball game. And I think John Sherman's the type of guy. I know he wants mass transit to be back to being part of the Royals. And I am thankful for that right field GA. And I am optimistic that we will see something like that again because I think it is necessary. That was a great summer for me. That was a great time. And that's what really blew up Royals baseball for me. So I am thankful for right field GA. All right. Subsection 2. Stanza 3, verse 4 of Rany's.
Let me get legal counsel on the line here. One moment. So, no, but just to piggyback on what you're saying, it's amazing to me how many friends, people I know who are now hardcore baseball fans, who really fell in love with the sport the way you're describing, with low priced, general admission, kind of standing room only, but tickets that were available for students, college students, sometimes high school even. So yeah, I think there is definitely, it's not just, a nice thing to do if you're an owner of a baseball team, but I think it is in the long run, good business sense to have a
yes.
section of your stadium. They don't have to be the best seats. In fact, they shouldn't be the best seats. They shouldn't be good seats.
No.
Part of the charm is that
Yes.
you're sitting there with other people who are kind of like you, who have more passion than money.
Yes.
But you're not there because you're a fat cat who's waiting to have ice cream served to you by ushers coming through. You're there to yell and scream and make fun of the other team's bullpen, guys in their bullpen or whatever it is. That's part of the charm.
It's not just that it obviously was part of sending me down a path towards my job and my career and what has been a huge part of my life ever since. But as a fan, listen, I don't have a suite. I can't afford crown seats. I've sucked it up and I bought it for a gift for my mom once. I can get in there every now and then. Thanks to my friends at Tickets for Less. Throw some love to one of my sponsors over on my radio show. They do a great job, and I was able to get it. But like you don't sell me those tickets. You don't get me buying good tickets now when I can afford at least good tickets, not the great tickets, but good tickets. If I didn't have those tickets then, and I'll tell you the other thing that was great about it was right field GA. We never sat in left field GA. Those were, I don't know what was wrong with those people. You sat in right field GA always. And I know some people, they didn't care. They'd sit in one or the other, but there were groups that it was, no, it's only right field, or no, it's only left field. And everyone thought left field was better because there's more right-handed bats and you're more likely to get a home run and all those kind of things. And we would debate over which one was better. There was just the whole aspect of the two sections was great. I hope we get something like that again in the future. Now, so your next one.
So my next one, I'm going to go back to the 2014-2015 Royals again. Shorter story, but
two tiny amoebas emerged from the ocean.
In the beginning, there was light. And then we'll fast forward to October 2nd, 2014.
Okay.
Now, that date probably doesn't ring that much of a bell. September 30th, 2014 certainly does. That's the date of the wild card game, right? Which was the most anticipated game in Royals history and the greatest game in Royals history. And that right there, I'm grateful for. That's a separate thing. But how amazing is that the game we waited the longest for, the game that the diehards were all out in attendance for, turned out to be the greatest game the Royals have ever played. No, this is their next game. Game one of the ALDS against the Angels. And I just remember being so grateful at the time that after getting one playoff game that could have been over in 3 hours, that our entire playoff run that I've been waiting, a generation for could have been over the rest, that we were guaranteed no matter what happened in game one, we were going to play another playoff game the next night. And then 2 nights later, they were going to play a third playoff game. Like, that just seemed almost like too good to be true that, oh my God, no matter what happens, the Royals are playing at least 3 playoff games. But little did we know the Royals were in the midst of an epic 8-game winning streak that would take them to the World Series. But what happens in game one of the ALDS?
Let me guess, you're going to tell us.
I am going to tell you, and I'm going to take a really long time to do it just to piss you off, Soren. So, game is tied 1-1. Bottom of the 6th inning. Jason Vargas is on the mound. All right, Jason Vargas.
Yeah.
Perfectly acceptable
Vargy, he threw the ball well tonight.
Yep, Vargy was great. But the 6th inning was always that bugaboo for the Royals because they had Kelvin Herrera for the 7th. They had Wade Davis for the 8th. They had Greg Holland for the 9th. And Ned Yost still believed in letting a starting pitcher stick it out through the 6th. And we all know, even then we knew about the third time through the lineup penalty. We knew it was a bad idea. We knew you were navigating a minefield. And Ned Yost, bless his heart, insisted on walking through that minefield. And damned if he never stepped on any mines. But they stepped on a mine in this game. It just didn't go off. Because with 1 out, Cole Calhoun singled. And that brought up the heart of the lineup: Mike Trout, Albert Pujols, and Howie Kendrick. 3 right-handed hitters. Jason Vargas was a lefty. I was screaming on Twitter, but still screaming for Jason Vargas to be taken out of the game. He managed to get Mike Trout, but then he walked Albert Pujols. So 2 on, 2 out, tie game. Howie Kendrick, who crushes lefties, crushed them throughout his career, needing only a single to take the lead. Ned Yost comes out to the mound. He talks to Jason Vargas. He leaves Jason Vargas in. He goes back to the mound. He goes back to the dugout and leaves Jason Vargas in to pitch to Howie Kendrick. Jason Vargas throws an 89-mile-an-hour fastball right down the middle. You can still find the video. If you go to my website, my long-defunct website, RanyOnTheRoyals.com, where I wrote about the 218 greatest moments of that run. And you think I'm insane on this podcast. I wrote about 218 moments, Soren. So
I don't think you're insane. I just think
this is just scratching the surface. Go to number 21. This ranks as number 21 on my list. You can watch the video. Fastball right down the middle. Howie Kendrick belts it to deep right center field. I don't know how many Royals fans remember this. This is one of the reasons why I'm bringing this up, because I still feel like this play nobody talks about. Lorenzo Cain ranges over from center field. He races to deepest right center, jumps at the fence. And you know that this ball's tattooed because Lorenzo Cain doesn't catch it. He doesn't get to the ball in time. But you know who does? Nori Aoki comes in from right field, crashes into the wall. Lorenzo Cain outstretched. They almost collide. Aoki catches the ball against the fence. But here's the reason why. That's not the reason why I'm bringing it up. Because if you watch the broadcast, and I've taken a screenshot of it, you can see the photo on my website. At the moment that Nori Aoki crashes into the fence, the ball's not yet in his glove. The ball is about to get into his glove. His eyes are closed. Nori Aoki, with his eyes closed, stabs at the wall, his face crushed up against it. The ball finds his glove. And the Royals are out of the inning. This is the moment we realized that Ned Yost had a horseshoe up his ass. Because if he doesn't catch the ball, it's at least one and almost certainly 2 runs scored. Even with Albert Pujols at first base, he's off with the pitch. It bounces off the wall. He's scoring. Instead, the game is tied. It stays tied into extra innings, into the 11th inning when Mike Moustakas hits a home run to give the Royals the lead. They win the game. It's a best of 5. Ned Yost made a terrible tactical mistake. His right fielder bails him out with a blind catch that changes a loss into a win in a best of 5 series. If he doesn't catch that ball, I don't think that series goes the way it does at all. I think the Royals are eliminated, and I think that whole wild card is just a footnote in history. And again, the reason I bring this up is when the Royals open their new stadium in a couple of years, right. You put up pictures. I want a photo. You put up photos of great moments in franchise history. No one talks about this moment because it's so absurd, so improbable. But if you say that team was kissed by God in that stretch of time, this is one example. Just look up that photo, look up that video, and tell me you're not grateful for all the good fortune that the Royals had in that stretch.
Okay. And we'll just I'll give a quick react. One, Nori Aoki, first day of spring training when he comes in 14, had all this Japanese candy delivered, and he let us. It was first day full squad. He might have been there a couple of days before, but I usually would get there 2 days before full squad. Most everybody was already there by then. All this Japanese candy comes. And he and his interpreter, mostly his interpreter, spend like 15 minutes setting up this cardboard. You know, like you know how like if you ever undo a cardboard box, you're like, oh my God, it folds, and like, how does this actually all come? You know, like real ornate one. And they set up this huge thing, and he put all these Japanese candies in it, and I can't remember what they were called. And it took 15 minutes for him to set it up. In 10 minutes, they were gone. It took him more time to set it up. That everybody, they had one and they were just grabbing it all, and it was gone. The next day, it was all gone. Aoki, I consider to be hugely underrated, and I wish the Royals would find more Nori Aokis, because Nori Aoki in 2014 had a 349 on base percentage. That was part of why it worked for the Kansas City Royals. So I'm with you on that. But I also have the reaction that you are convinced that the Royals are the luckiest championship team ever because you've got a Noriaoki catch and an Alex Gordon swing. If either one of those things don't happen, they get shelled. They get shelled in the divisional playoffs, and so if they don't get to where Alex Gordon can make his run to third and get held up, then they don't win the next year. So it really all came down to Noriaoki. That's the one thing
I mean,
backtrack your timeline.
It really goes back to Gerard Dyson stealing third in the wild card. Like, I'm not even putting that on the list because it's so obvious. But the Royals went 22-9 in the playoffs in a 2-year stretch, and they were a gnat's behind away from going 1-3.
I'm just saying. I'm just wanting to point out that
there was luck involved. There's no question there was luck involved. That's part of what made it so much fun.
The Royals' success in the postseason of 14 and 15 is likened to a Marvel movie where the world was literally hanging by a thread 17 consecutive times, and every time it was saved. I love that. I love.
Well, here's the thing. At the time, I was still unwilling to admit that that luck wasn't just the residue of design, because for it to happen 2 years in a row made me think maybe there was something special about the Royals. Maybe there was something special about the way Dayton Moore put this team together. Maybe there was something to, his method that I didn't understand. And then we saw what happened over the next 7 years and realized, oh, maybe they just got really damn lucky.
Yeah,
and you know what? I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that.
I'm not. I don't believe in luck. Because if they're lucky, then they're unlucky when they suck. And I am not giving anybody a free pass when they suck.
I don't know if you have to necessarily when you miss the playoffs by 2 games, you're unlucky. When you miss it by 25 games, then you're not unlucky.
You do in my world. We're either giving credit or we're not, and
I'm fine with saying they're lucky and still giving them credit. And like I said, I almost enjoy it more knowing how close they came to not pulling it off. Like you said, a Marvel movie where they just kill everybody and they're never in peril, that's not nearly as fun to watch.
Yeah. I hear you. I don't think baseball playoff series are like Marvel movies, though. I think they're
not supposed to be.
I think they're a much more truer outcome than people want to believe. That, like, if that one play didn't happen, then everything else goes against them. I don't buy that. Anyway, I digress. Let's move on. Okay. My next thing that I am thankful for, I think we're going to get to 3 based on what I'm looking at here. The next thing that I am thankful for is Carlos Beltran, and not Carlos Beltran the player, Carlos Beltran the man. Listen, I've never understood the outrage against the Astros for stealing signs. You and I have talked about that before. I don't get why you can steal it standing at second base, and why, if you use technology, there's any difference. I don't get. I mean, I think of racing. If you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. I don't get it. And him being a part of that, I don't care. It means nothing to me. I'm going to tell you what I know of Carlos Beltran was there was never a more. He is the last best example of an open, honest player that I've ever covered. And I learned so much from Carlos Beltran, not necessarily teaching me the game, right? I followed the game for a long time and knew the nuances and different things that were going on. But standing at the batting cage and talking to him, which he would do, he would stand there. And he would stand there and do it with a dipwad. I was a media guy, and I'd been around. I don't know how old I was when I was covering him. I was probably 30-ish. 31. So I'd been around for a few years. It wasn't like I was a 21-year-old kid in my first job or something. But he would sit around the batting cages and talk hitting, talk baseball philosophy, and talk honestly and openly about what his thoughts were. And that year before he got traded, I'm like, he's going to get dealt. Anytime I get a chance to get around Carlos Beltran, I'm going to get around him. It started in spring training. And in spring training, I said, Carlos, I want to see what your workouts are like. Is there, where do you go? Like, you work out here? Do you work out? He said, no, I work out at a little gym over here, over by such and such. I said, when do you work out? He said, I work out at this time. And I said, well, can I come and just check out your workout? Or I said, can I even try a couple of things. I just want to see what it is. And so I watched him run with parachutes and all the different things he was doing to try to increase his athleticism. He was obviously a brilliant athlete to begin with. It is unbelievable what he, was doing and how great he was. Everyone knows about the tennis balls and,
Right.
The ocular things, always working to make himself better when he was already an amazingly gifted player, but also willing to sit there and tell me what he was doing. And even tell me, I remember one of the things he said to me, and this is just an example. There are other things that I wouldn't share. But he said, I said, well, what are you thinking about? I said, when you get out there, you're going to be doing a contract year. If you get traded, if it's here, what are you looking for? He said, well, Scott said you steal bases, Scott being Scott Boras, you steal bases. Now that gets you the big contract. Then after that, you got to hit home runs. Which, if you look at his career, that's exactly what he did. He's arguably the greatest base stealer ever if you go by success rate and the quality of stolen base that he would take. You needed a bag. It was important to get to second base. It was important to get to third. I remember a game against the Diamondbacks, which was a one-off game, a makeup from a rainout. I think Randy Johnson was on the hill, and the Royals won, and they won in the bottom of the ninth inning, or maybe it was the 10th, and they didn't even get a hit. And it's because Carlos Beltran drew a walk or a hit by pitch, stole second, stole third, and came home on a sac fly. When it was time, when you needed a base, when it really mattered, he could go do it. And that's because the man worked at it. He had a game plan for everything he was doing. He was honest. English wasn't even his first language. I can't stress how he taught me about. I said, like, well, what do you think about, he was telling me about accents. He said, well, he's got a different accent. So what do you mean he speaks Spanish? He goes, well, like, you speak English, but do you sound the same as a guy from New York? I'm like, duh, no. Now I get it. And he's like, yeah, the Venezuelans can't understand a word they're saying. No idea. And, just the culture, talking to me about how there was no Puerto Rican restaurants, really allowed me to understand the Latin player, the Puerto Rican player, the difference between the different Latin players, his work ethic. I learned so much about the game of baseball from Carlos Beltran. And it's because a guy who English wasn't even his first language, it was his second language, would allow me to just sit and talk to him. And that is something that is being taken away from every sport. Every sport, they're being isolated and showcased in the way that marketing wants them to be seen. I saw the real Carlos Beltran. I got to get close to the real Carlos Beltran, and I will always be thankful for that time. And maybe he changed and evolved with big contracts and money, but in that one partial season, I probably learned as much about baseball as I had anywhere else. And I learned it from a guy who was talking my language, making the effort to talk my language to me about something he didn't have to do. I'll always be very, very thankful for being able to cover Carlos Beltran when I did.
That's a good one, and I don't want to. We'll save his Hall of Fame case for later because that is an episode in itself. But I'm certainly grateful for Carlos Beltran as well, and I never got to talk to him. I think very briefly in the clubhouse at one point. And I want to bring up that when he came up, you got a chance. I don't know if you covered him as a rookie, but like those people who did saw him mature at the major league level. That's not an easy thing to do. I mean, he made it to the majors at 21, was rookie of the year at 22, still didn't have great English. And remember, his sophomore season was, he had an injury. I think the Royals were trying to push him back from an injury, and there were some issues where he didn't actually want to play for the team because he didn't feel he was 100% healthy yet. And I remember him getting a lot of flack, not necessarily from the team, but even from the local media that, is this guy really committed to the sport? I think there was probably some language translation difficulties that were going on there. And, at the time, he probably wasn't, respected for the difficulties that he was going through navigating a new country, a new language. He had immense talent, but, there's more to playing than just talent. Sometimes being that talented at that young an age, you're forced to grow up quickly. And I always give him a tremendous amount of credit for him coming through that experience, a better player and, a better person and not becoming distrustful of the media. I mean, if anybody, you hear about players, I think of someone like Eddie Murray, who's in the Hall of Fame, who had a bad experience with the media early in his career and then basically refused to talk to the media for the rest of his career. Beltran got burned a little bit early in his career, and yet it did not keep him from opening up to you and to other people, and from becoming one of the most respected players, in the game, and kind of, in retiring, kind of a legend. We'll talk more about the career in its totality later, but I just wanted to add to that. And I was very grateful to be able to root for him, one of the most talented players the Royals have ever had. And on that note, my third and final thing that I'm grateful for, much less.
We do episodes 5 and 6 and 7 in our
when in our ongoing series, part H of this Thanksgiving special. No, my final one is simply I'm just so grateful that Zack Greinke was a Royal, and that Zack Greinke came back to be a Royal again. And you talk about the players in the last 30 years, since George Brett retired, certainly, that had that kind of transcendent talent. To me, it was Carlos Beltran and Zack Greinke. And Zack Greinke was such a different guy. Came up when he was 20 as a rookie, and even more so about Beltran. The talent was. It wasn't just that he was so insanely talented as a pitcher, but that his talent was so different than every other pitcher. That you think of your typical 20-year-olds, it's Felix Hernandez, Justin Verlander, guys who've thrown upper 90s, just kind of throwing heat from day one. They throw harder than everybody else. And Zack was never that guy. He could, he just didn't. And to this day, there's just never been a pitcher quite like him who succeeded with command, control, and he had the stuff when he needed to, but he just thought differently. And it was the way he thought, as much as that made him kind of an enigma off the mound and in interviews, that enigmatic nature, I think, served him so well on the mound, because hitters could never guess what he was going to do next. And that, worked for him so well. But you think about all the struggles that he went through, with social anxiety and wanting to actually be away from the Royals for a while, and going back down to the minor leagues and rebuilding himself, and coming back, throwing harder than ever and using his best stuff more often, and then putting in what's probably the greatest season by a Royals pitcher of all time. It's that or Brett Saberhagen in 1989. And Saberhagen certainly had a much better team around him. That 2009 Greinke season, the Royals didn't deserve him, and they tried to sabotage him at every turn, and he still turned in an all-time season for the ages. And then having the temerity to speak up and say, I want out because you're never going to win anything with me here. Maybe you can win without me here. And lo and behold, he was absolutely right. And his parting gift to the Royals was the core of a championship team that he would not be here to see. Yeah. But to see him succeed and thrive with the Brewers, briefly with the Angels, the Dodgers, the Diamondbacks, even from afar, I always rooted for Zack Greinke. And so for him to come back last season, it was something I was, hoping for, but really didn't think the Royals would be able to pull it off, because I didn't know that they were on good enough terms with him that he would be willing to come back. And for him to come back, and not only for him to come back, but to find out it was really kind of his idea, that he always wanted to return. And to return with, his 3 young children who get to watch their dad pitch. It's a different guy. And I'm still hopeful that he'll come back for one more season. And I feel bad for him that he didn't get to play on a team worthy of his services. And I'm so much looking forward to him pitching a meaningful game for the Royals for the first time in his life in 2023. But I was just so grateful to get to watch him again. And, throwing softer than ever, and yet still one of the most effective guys on the team. I just hope the other pitchers learned a lot from watching him.
I can echo the Greinke sentiments. My favorite guy to interview. He wouldn't do many interviews, but until his final year, and his last year, he wouldn't sit down with me. But every year I could get him to do, I said, Zack, I'm going to bother you once. You sit down with me once, you won't have to talk to me again. One interview. Okay, I'll be out there. And he'd come out and he'd sit down, and it'd usually be late in the day. I was doing 10 to 2 then. And, I'd sit around and I'd wait till 5:30, 6 o'clock, waiting for Zack to come out. We had hits we had to do for the rest of the station and everything. And it was me and Doug Stewart. And it's like, what are you guys doing? Are you leaving? I'm like, nah, Zack's still in there. He says he's going to come out. And here he'd come. I mean, I think he was trying to wait us out. He wanted us gone. But he'd come out and he'd live up to what he said, something I can't say about every player. There's some, and I'll never say who. I've said many times there's somebody that I think that everyone talks about that like, yeah, I'll give you the other side someday. Not while I'm not now or anytime soon, but one day I may tell the story. But Zach lived up to it. Every time he said he'd do it. And it was the best. The Zack Greinke interview is to be cherished. It's filled with long pauses. People don't understand. Like when I hear like there's some really good people. I don't want to name anybody, but there's like Jim Harbaugh is a great interview, right? Like I've heard some folks rip Jim Harbaugh. It's like because he has pauses, and like when you talk and talk and talk, like I that's all I do is talk. You got to pause every now and then. That's what brings the listener in. That's what makes you go, wait a minute, what's going on? It makes you stop what you're doing. And Greinke has all these wonderful long pauses, awkward pauses, pauses that make you nervous. You're nervous for him. You're nervous for yourself. It's just the best radio ever to get him on there. And from talking about having the touch gene, when I said, how do you throw strikes? Like you didn't even pitch that much in high school, man. You were like a position player. You barely pitched. Now you come out and you throw strikes. It's always had the touch gene. I can hit free throws, I can putt a golf ball. I got a wicked jump serve in volleyball. Like I find the kid who's not any good and I just pound him. Which that line in and of itself told me so much. Like 1, he had the touch gene. 2, he can play just about any sport. 3, he's a ruthless winner.
He's ruthless, yes.
I found the kid who sucks and I pounded him. Man, and that was just absolute priceless conversations with him, and just really enjoyed every part of it. So I'm with you on Zach. I've told this one before, but I'm gonna tell it again for since it'll be my parting one. Unless you've got another one that you want to get in,
Do you really want to open that up to let me have one more, Soren? I think
I'll give you one more. I've told this story before, so forgive me if people have heard it. And I actually told this story at when George Brett went to the Hall of Fame. People who are younger don't remember what a big deal that was, right? I know that George Brett's got 3,100 plus hits and 300 plus homers. He's first in all these different categories. He's a Hall of Famer and he's a president and an ambassador for this team. And if you were young and you didn't see George Brett play, you're kind of, he wasn't Mahomes. Like I've said, Patrick Mahomes is George Brett plus Len Dawson times Bo Jackson. And I really believe that that's a pretty accurate way to describe what he was. But he was on the next tier, right? And he was royalty. Tom Watson was as well as a golfer in these parts. But he was number 2. He was ahead of Tom Watson. He was ahead of Len Dawson, in my opinion. He was up there. He was a really big deal. And so when he went into the Hall of Fame, we had event after event after event. I worked on the station that had the Royals then. And I got to tell this story with George Brett sitting in the audience, right? There were 2 or 3 different things I had to do with, around events for George Brett. George Brett, I swear to you, in his heart of heart, would tell you today probably, if you got him off the mic and off the record, yeah, I was so sick of that crap. Because it was just a parade of talking about how great he was, and he was. And it's just what you do, particularly when you're the first guy from a franchise to go in. And I told this story. It was an event at Starlight Theater, and I said, what does George Brett mean to this town? I talked about the numbers and all this. I said, but you know what George Brett means to this town, at least what he means to me, what it did for me. I said, I was a 17-year-old kid that went away to school in Syracuse, New York, and knew nobody, right? And it was a little scary. It was a little intimidating, right? And we had I'm sure all colleges do different things like this. You had to live in a dorm your freshman and sophomore year at Syracuse, or pretty much you did. You could get out of it, but for the most part, you had to live in a dorm. So we all lived in the dorms our first 2 years. And that freshman year, here I am with these weird talking New Yorkers and Boston guys and Philly guys and all this and gals, Jersey girls, huge hair and everything. And we had they brought everybody together in the lounge and you had to tell something about yourself. And I'm like, oh geez, here I am, the hick, right? Everybody's already asked me do I have cows in my backyard and all that kind of crap. And so when I got ready to start talking, a guy who would go on to be a really good friend of mine, Derek Furlow, goes, "Hey, tell us about your boy George Brett. How's he doing? Love him." And this is a guy from Boston, he's a big Red Sox fan. And that got me talking about that. I started talking baseball with these guys from Boston. And I walked out of that meeting, that function or whatever, and I had two new friends that I walked down the hall and we chatted about Royals baseball and Royals Red Sox games. Had George Brett not played, had George Brett not been a great player, maybe I'm this dorky kid, from Kansas sitting in talking to people from New York and Boston, and there's no connection, right? Because we had nothing in common. Yeah, we had George Brett. We had baseball, but in my case, we had George Brett. And so I am thankful that George Brett's career was what it was, that he was a Hall of Famer, that he stayed in Kansas City, that he was a career Royal, for all the things that it means for Royals baseball and it means for this organization, and to have that kind of player and to win a world championship in 85, which was a great time for those of us that are older and that remembers it. But to be able to have something that connected me and open the door on my first day alone in a new city, state, part of the country, I will always be thankful for that. And I wouldn't have it if George Brett had not been the player he was. So I'm thankful for George Brett, the player. He was outstanding. He was outstanding.
I can absolutely second that sentiment because I went off to college when I was 16. I moved away from Wichita, and I've basically haven't lived in the Kansas City Royals viewing area ever since. And what astonishes me is wherever I went, from Baltimore for college, when I lived in Detroit for medical school, and then about 20 years in Chicago, whenever I meet baseball fans, but certainly not so much now just because they're younger, but like anybody who was old enough to have been around in the 70s and 80s. And they could be Yankees fans. In fact, especially Yankees fans, which is astonishing to me. The degree when they find out that I'm a Royals fan or from the Kansas area, the level of respect and adoration for George Brett specifically it's universal. Like I said, I mean, Yankees, you would think they would hate his guts, and they may have hated him on the field, but like the amount of respect that he has from fans of other teams. Oh man, I loved watching George Brett play. That's what I hear even now. And that's the thing. The numbers of it amazing. You can look at his numbers on Baseball Reference if you didn't get a chance to see him play, and you can see, yes, he's an absolute like first ballot Hall of Famer in terms of quality. One of the probably maybe he's not one of the 20 greatest players of all time, but almost certainly one of the 50. Right, clear Hall of Fame. But it's not just that. It's the fact that he elevated his game when it mattered most. His performance, you can dig through the numbers. His performance with runners in scoring position, his performance in close games, and certainly his performance in the postseason. He always elevated his game when it mattered the most. Playing, the Yankees were terrified of him in the playoffs, and with good reason. I mean, he had 3 home runs off of them in one game in the 78 playoffs. Somehow the Royals lost that game, but then he put the dagger in their heart in 1980. By taking Goose Gossage came in to face him, most terrifying reliever in the game. Boom, 450 feet to right field, and nobody threw George Brett a fastball again for another 5 years or so. And then so it's not just that, but also just his panache, his flair on the field, the fact that he always went 100%. Right? There's the famous the famous play of him in the 85 World Series running after a foul ball and flying into I believe it was the Cardinals dugout. I don't think it was it was the Cardinals dugout, and sliding, risking life and limb. And for a guy who was somewhat injury prone, in part because he always gave 100%, that was a terrifying moment in the World Series. He was fine. He didn't even catch the ball. But it remains an indelible moment. This is a guy who will give you 100% the moment he steps onto the field. You add all of that up, and you have a guy who, you mentioned all these other athletes, the Tom Watsons and Len Dawsons, and yes, they're all on the Mount Rushmore of Kansas City athletes. But before Patrick Mahomes, George Brett was clearly number one. And I think it's the fact that we are putting in this caveat before Patrick Mahomes, that might say more about that might be a better compliment of Patrick Mahomes than anything else I can think of. That George Brett is clearly not at the Patrick Mahomes level. That's insane. If you had told me even 5 years ago that Kansas City is going to have an athlete that puts George Brett to shame, I would have not thought that possible. but the qualities are very similar. And, a great player who plays at his best in the biggest moments, who represents the organization well at all times. George has always done that. And I'm fortunate that I got to see the last half of his career.
So if you can do it in under half an hour, because it was your topic, I don't want to take away. If you've got one more that you really want.
I mean, I think I don't think we can have this show without at least saying I'm grateful that I got to watch the Bo Jackson experience up close in person.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, Bo, I've not, the book is right here. In fact, I'll put it up. I've not cracked it open yet, but I am so excited to read the book. That's the Last Folk Hero here by Jeff Pearlman right here. I've heard just amazing things about it. I've had it on my desk. I'm waiting. You got it right there as well. Yeah. So I'm waiting for it's like the perfect.
There you go, Jeff. Read. Go ahead and send us a couple of bucks. We just plugged the crap out of your book.
Yeah, but I've heard great things and I'm very excited, but I want, it has to be the right moment because it's the sort of book, every page is just going to have some ridiculous story about Bo's athleticism, about his feats in high school, college. And it's, again, in the before Patrick Mahomes era, Bo Jackson was my one experience with the most famous athlete in America being someone who played for my team. And maybe it was only half of his career because, of course, the other half he was playing football. He was playing for the hated Oakland Raiders. But the half that we had was enough. And I got to, I didn't see every ridiculous play live. I didn't see his throw to get Harold Reynolds to play live, but I saw him run up the wall in Baltimore. I was watching that game on TV in July of 1990 or whatever it was. And you see him catch that ball, and then you see him just make that last-minute decision. I think I'm going to run up this wall. And by the time he came down, you're just like, yeah, we're going to be talking about that play for a while. I don't think I knew it would be 30 years later, but yeah, I'm not surprised. And he was a once-in-a-lifetime kind of athlete. It sucks the way it ended, and especially because he was just figuring out how to actually be a good baseball player and not just a freakish athlete. Because when he started out, he was, a freakish athlete, but he had a lot of weaknesses in his game. But by 1990, 89 and 90, he was a legitimately excellent baseball player. And was, his strikeouts were coming down, his defensive routes were getting better. Like he had a chance to age into his 30s as an MVP caliber player for several years. And we were robbed of that. And on some level, I almost feel like the decline of the Royals sort of started with that injury. The Royals never felt quite as relevant again after that. But for 4 years, he was everywhere. He was the best commercials were him. The best everything was him, and it was fun to watch.
Yeah. To your point, on base percentage by year at age 23 gets the big leagues in 86 for just 25 games, 286. Following year 296, 287 and 88, 310 in 89, which was his where he had 172 strikeouts to lead the league, but also hit 32 home runs and drove in 105.
Went to the All-Star game.
Next year plays in 111 games. On base is up to 342. Following year plays in just 23 games. On base is up to 333. So he was starting to become, like you said, the all-around baseball player and get into the habit of it, get into the feel and really maximize his abilities. And it was taken away. No doubt. It was fun times to be a Royals fan. No doubt. Fun times to talk about what we're thankful for, Rany. And of course, I'm always thankful for doing the podcast with you, my friend. Always
as am I, Soren.
You're the man. You're the man.
And that concludes the Hallmark movie portion of this podcast. So.
Yes. And we'll save more on Carlos Beltran, the Hall of Famer, for another day, as we've already gone about an hour 10 here. So we'll shut it down here. So for the good doctor, Dr. Rany Jazayerli, my name is Soren Petro. Thank you very much for joining us here on Kaufman Corner.